All right. Well, welcome back to the Underground Warriors podcast, the show where we dive deep into mindset and tactics and grit of top elite performers, entrepreneurs, and modern day warriors. I'm John Christian, conscious human performance coach and founder of Zerkers Academy, an adventure based human performance academy for impact driven leaders and entrepreneurs. And today I have an absolutely amazing guest with me, Aaron Ellis, which is a really good friend, a force of nature. He's battled through adversity and pushed his limits, and now he's dedicating his life to helping others do the same, whether that's business, personal growth, or relentless pursuit of greatness. Aaron embodies resilience. So excited to introduce it today, Aaron. And when we kick off with the background story, the origin story, the warrior story of where you've come from and where you're going.
Sure. So, I can go deep in rabbit holes. So, guide me, stop me, correct me, move me in the direction you want me to go as much as you want. So, I'm just going to share with what arises. I was literally, my mom will tell you I was singing songs before I was speaking full sentences. Before I was a year old, I would sing myself to sleep in my crib. So, music has always been a huge part of my life. I was diagnosed autistic as a child. My mother was a developmental psychology professor at a certain point in her career, and I was not told that I was autistic. I was treated differently, and I was taught how to basically understand life. I used to walk around with a dictionary and a thesaurus and a book of idioms, and every time I had a question, my mom would say, "Look it up." And as with a lot of children who are on the spectrum, we gravitate towards something and obsess. And I obsessed with music, and all I wanted to do was play music. And started out, I had to take piano. That was a rule in my house before I could play guitar, but I was actually playing guitar at the same time. Little did my parents know, because I was using my brother's. But I just resonated towards music, and I also just did what I wanted to do and was encouraged to do that. Now, much to my parents' dismay, when it turned into a profession at a very young age, and that's all I wanted to do, which led me to dropping out of high school and everything. So, but it was because I was taught to do what I wanted to do. I didn't really have any one day if onlys in me. I just did what I wanted, which is part of an autistic spectrum brain too. It's very literal. So I would say the things that could have been considered adversity in the beginning was, like, I started performing in 87. My parents didn't see me perform until 97. And, I was performing at a very high level far before they saw, right? So it's just because they were educators and they didn't quite understand what I was doing. But over the years, music played a major role. I was basically only did music for a solid 20, 25 years. Well, I should correct that. I started speaking at corporations as well, due to a relationship I had in the music industry and business, which became one of my main mentors and taught me a lot of business lessons and laws. And that started years and years ago, and I didn't realize it was even happening until the last maybe 10 years. I reflect back to some of those times and things I learned. And it's pretty amazing that I have relationships now with people that I met back then when I was long hair and leather, and they were in three-piece suits, and now I don't have the hair and I'm doing business with them again. So it's pretty cool to see. So I started speaking as well. I always had kind of a concept of mindset and personal growth. I sought growth all the time. Like, as a young 15-year-old, I started studying every religion you can think of, every school of thought, from astrology to numerology. I just wanted to understand life. And a lot of me wanted to understand myself, because the way my brain was so structured, literally, I didn't understand people, and I was often misunderstood. And so there was that kind of adversity the whole time, where I felt alone, felt lost, didn't feel like I was understood, although I didn't feel that way. I don't know how to really explain it. It was almost like that was put on me. But when I was alone and not thinking about it, I felt great. But when I was faced with, "What are you talking about? You can't do that. That's not the way life works," I would get kind of confused, right? I would say it led to I'm not sure where you want me to go, John, but the biggest, I would say, the turning point, the biggest thing that was the probably the biggest adversity for me up until most recently was, I was signed to Warner Brothers, and my business manager embezzled almost $500,000 from me and sexually assaulted me and harassed me for a year. And that was probably the biggest thing, which really shattered my any form of egoic shell and false identity I had. primarily believing that I was supposed to be a musician and a songwriter because I'd been doing it for so many years. And everybody always said, when you look at the evidence, oh, you were singing before you know, before you were a year old, you became a professional musician, in your teens and stuff, right? So people would say, you're meant to be, living your purpose. And I had to learn that that was just an expression of who I was. It wasn't who I was. So when I look back at that time, albeit something I wouldn't necessarily want to wish on anybody else unless they needed it for their growth, I see it with nothing but gratitude now because it really cracked me open and broke away any false identities of what I am not. So who I am could come forth, at least for the next several years, right? Which led to I guess to the next adversity that I've been facing the last year and a half or so. So I'll
Yeah.
pause there. I don't know where you want me to dive any deeper or whatnot. I can keep going, that. So
Yeah, there's a few things in there that we can unpack a little bit. And the idea that at a young age, a lot of times as we grow up, we start to get away from that thing that we know is like when you say like I can do this and somebody says no, you start to second guess yourself. But with that mindset that you had, you got into what you like to do, what you enjoyed doing, and you stuck with it and really focused on it. I think that's key to any kind of success is having the resiliency to, ask questions and say, why can't I do that? Like, it doesn't make sense,
yeah.
and that childlike wonder oftentimes gets lost in the journey. And then the idea of identity work, right? So I talk a lot about identity change work. And when everything's stripped away from you, like who are you at the core? And being able to go through those challenging moments and not base your value or your worth on what you do, more so the human being that you are. And
Mhm.
a lot of people are, put into those situations after the fact and go through very challenging uh, path to refinding themselves. And I think that's one of the things you and I are very passionate about is helping people find the truth of who they are and bring that out and get them connected and know that they're more than what they do. They're more than a father, more than an employee, more than an entrepreneur or a business person. Like, who are you at the core, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes that takes a lot of courage to step into that and really look in the mirror and
Mhm.
figure out who that person is.
And sometimes life forces you to, which it
Right.
did for me. It literally took away I want to say my biggest dream, but it wasn't really something I dreamed of. It was something I knew would happen. It was kind of a knowing. But when
Mhm.
I finally achieved that knowing, meaning a solo record deal with Warner Brothers, and I'd had 3 record deals before with other bands and stuff, but that solo deal was me expressing myself that that's when, like I mentioned, I learned that who I am was not the things that I did. Who I am wasn't those achievements. Who I am was not that record deal. Who I am was not the body that was harassed and assaulted, right?
Right.
It was much more than that. And I really, I know you know this term too, but the whole term like cultivating the witness and understanding into that during that time period when I literally allowed myself to believe that I never would do music again. I let myself have all those thoughts, knowing that rather than resisting them and saying, oh, that's not true, just you'll get over it, stuff like that, I let myself fully experience what it felt like to say, I'm never going to do music again. But from the witness perspective, I knew that I would.
Right.
So it was really kind of interesting. It's kind of hard to explain other than it was just a crazy experience where I locked myself in my cabin for months.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. So kind of isolated,
yeah.
recalibrate, and being somebody that is sensing the world and in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes it makes sense to take that time, and sit with yourself and allow that to settle. What would you say in that whole time in your life was the biggest lesson from that adversity? The truth of stepping into what you know to be true and to pursue that, or what was that lesson that from that adversity?
I think the biggest lesson that I fully learned and embodied and lived was that not resisting how I was feeling or my thoughts. So again, if I felt like I'm never going to make it through this, I let myself feel that thought all the way, where my brain, typically your brain was like, no, that's not true. You're going to be fine. You've made it through things before. Or if I talk to a friend, they'd try to take me out of that. Or like I said, just saying that I'll never play music again. I knew I wouldn't. So I fully gave myself grace and understanding and allowed myself to release the energy of those patterns. Where if we try to resist them and try to stop ourselves from having those thoughts, we actually keep the energy within us and we just kind of press the energy down. We might take the edge off, but we never release it. So I really fully learned how to fully live as the witness and witness my body, mind, and all the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions and the physical ailments, everything that was going on, but also to be able to reintegrate that. So almost
Yeah.
like experience the separation of the two, but the integration of the two in that probably 9-month period that I was isolating myself.
Yeah. It becomes a question of choice and of observation, being able to observe the situation
Yeah.
and not be a victim to the circumstances, and really be able to step outside of ourselves and observe and watch those thoughts go by. And there's a difference between observing your thoughts and that being who you are, as opposed
Mhm.
to simply a thought that's passing, because we're in this human body with this, mind that has a tendency to put those thoughts in there, you know?
And
So,
sometimes, like one of the techniques I used was like I would watch the train of thoughts come into the station, and then watch it go through the station and go down the down the tracks as long as I could until I couldn't see it anymore,
yeah.
rather than jumping on the train.
Hmm.
So I literally use that visualization sometimes, just watching my thoughts as a train coming
Yeah.
in the station, not choosing not to get on the train and watching it go off into the
Right.
sunset. Right.
Yeah. And that's the difference between like pain and suffering. Like something can be painful, but are we going to suffer through it and hold on to it, for as long as we can,
Yeah.
and go through
That's
or
another
go through the healing process.
that's another really good way to do it. I really learned to decipher the subjective and the objective, like what was actually happening and what the story I was telling about it. I really
Hmm.
learned to separate those out, and the pain was in the objective. There was true pain there, but the suffering was in the subjective and the story that I kept telling. So I was
Right.
able to unravel that story simply by just seeing it for what it was, not
Yeah.
necessarily even trying to unravel it other than allowing it to run its course.
Yeah, exactly. And that ties really well into the idea of mindset, and the kind of mindset it takes to move forward as opposed to quitting. And so we talk a lot about like, show up and flow as a mindset. So you want to talk a little bit about that as a strategy
Yeah.
for people to adopt?
So around that time, I would say probably 2006, 7, 8, 9. This is when all this stuff was happening. That record deal was actually 2006, and 2009, 8, 9 was when I was there. But in that time period in 2007 is when I met Wayne Dyer. And I met him in Maui, and we became really good friends, and were friends till he passed several years later. And that was a concept that came out of a lot of our conversations, where I understood that it was not what we did that dictated our results. It was how we showed up and flowed through what we did. And I didn't know how to communicate that at first. He really helped me learn how to articulate what I already knew. And when it comes to how we show up and flow rather than what we do, when people fully understand that, they don't necessarily even have to change what they do. It has to do with how they show up and flow through it. And it's not just the actions, but our thoughts. The result is dictated by how we show up and flow through our thoughts, our words. It's how we show up and flow through the word. It's not the word itself. So, for example, if we take words like, I'm doing the best I can, I just said it without anything behind it right now. Most of the time, when you hear that statement, people are like, I'm doing the best I can, which is usually I'm self loathing, I'm justifying, you don't realize what I've gone through, I'm doing the best I can, I need comfort. Right. But what if we changed that phrase and came into it and showed up and flowed through it as I'm doing the best I can? Totally different meaning, right? Same words, same meaning, right?
Yeah.
Also, actions. I love using the example of, like, especially you're married, I know your wife and stuff. And let's say she loved flowers, right? And you bought her flowers just to simply arise joy in her. And that's it. And you'd give her those flowers, and she loved the flowers and took care of them and put them in a vase, and it was beautiful. Then let's say you've been working too much. You haven't been spending as much time with you as you know that she wants. You haven't been able to be present and listen. So you buy her flowers because you're feeling guilty about that. Now, same action, but oftentimes when I've talked about this with other married couples or couples, those flowers don't even sometimes make it to a vase. They're not appreciated the same way. They might be, oh, thank you for the flowers, but they're set to the side because the action is the same, but you were coming at one, it's in the giving I receive. I wanted to arise love in someone, where the other one was, I don't want them to not love me. Right. So you showed up with fear with one and showed up with love with the other. And life's exactly the same way.
Yeah.
So when it comes to how we show up and flow through things, that's what I've really learned and refined since I was very young. Even when I mentioned, 15 years old, I started upbringing. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I find the essence of what they're talking about. And when we understand that essence, which is also who we are, meaning who we are at a soul level, then our outer expressions are what we do. Our outer expressions and what we do becomes way more effective, and the results become way more abundant, I guess you could say, when we're showing up and flowing in a present, loving manner rather than fear. When you're showing up from fear, you're going to perpetuate more fear. When you're showing up with love and gratitude, you're going to perpetuate more love and gratitude. So again, it's not what we do, what we say, or what we think. It's how we show up and flow through each of those things that dictates our results.
Yeah, 100%. And that reminds me of the Japanese scientist experiment where, looking at the flower as an example, it'd be interesting to see if those flowers died sooner than other flowers that actually were given out of like that loving energy. And the scientists in Japan, they studied the water, right? And they put
Yeah,
two water glasses next to each other. And one, he said, I love you too. And the other, he said, I hate you too. And then that water, the molecules changed on a
crystals
molecular
were
level, right?
beautiful in the one and
Yeah,
totally distorted in the other. Yep.
exactly. So thinking about how we show up and flow through life, and if we're showing up with negative thoughts, negative emotions, sending negative thoughts, negative emotions to others, we're only hurting ourselves.
Yeah.
So next time somebody gets cut off and all pissed off, like think about what that's doing to you versus, the person that can't even hear you in the other car. So
Yep.
what are we choosing? Are we choosing, to operate at the highest levels or of consciousness, or are we operating at lower levels, which is more dense and energies like the love and the hate conversation? So I love how that
Yeah.
ties into the show up and flow
I'd love to
conversation.
share one other aspect of that, John, one other example of that. Because to me, it was just of course, in my brain, the way my little brain was, but I meet people who one thing goes wrong or they have a negative thought about something and everything wrong in their life all of a sudden comes flooding in. They start thinking about everything wrong, right? So their deductive reasoning from one negative thought turns into this just perpetual, path of negative thoughts, right? The beauty of that is that you can do that with positive thoughts as well. You can think of times when you were on point, when you were like present, when everything was going and everything was clicking for you, and you will think of more things like that. So just we literally have the power of our thoughts. And when we start having those negative thoughts, to realize and have the awareness around the fact that we're perpetuating that thought process, that train of thoughts, we jumped on it. We can also choose to jump on the positive train or the train where everything is working out. And just by remembering, just like when the negative ones, we remember the bad times, and that turns into remembering more bad times. We can remember the good times, which will turn into remembering more good times. And one is disempowering, one is empowering. And people have the choice to do either. Now, normally they do the negative one because that's the collective consciousness of our world, pretty much. Everybody does that, right? But if you stop yourself and even start your day that way, to like, I'm going to think of a time when I was on point, when I was present, when everything was going exactly the way I wanted it to, like everything just, you're in that flow state. And then you start making decisions from there. Watch what changes in your world that day, man. You start to make such different decisions. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And even the reality, looking at your reality in a different way. So if you're looking at somebody and you're saying they're not listening, the reality is you're creating that reality that they in your mind that they're not listening, but maybe they're listening. And if you said, well, maybe I'm not listening, and then the reality changes. And even going down to that quantum physics level, like what we perceive is it changes reality. There's real science behind all this stuff, and when you can tap into it and observe it, you literally change your reality and the way you show up and the way others show up.
Yeah,
So hold those people in your life high, and the reality will change. You know, it's speaking into people what you see in them.
yeah.
So what would you say the biggest mental roadblock is that you think are holding people back in applying some of these ideas and strategies in their lives?
Yeah, wow. Ultimately, honestly, it's the way their brains have been conditioned. So I'll phrase this in a couple different ways. Most people have been taught that I have to do something to have something to be something. So I have to go to work to have money to be secure, right? We've learned literally the backwards way of showing up and flowing through life. It's actually understanding your being, that you have everything. You're not creating anything new. You're just arranging things to your preference. It's already all there. And from that being and knowing, you take action. So rather than do, have, be, it's actually be, have, do. And that's really the way to thrive in life and really the way to be an abundant life. But again, we've been taught the opposite way our whole life, our education system, everything. No fault of anybody. That blaming others is not going to help either. It's just when you realize that, you're like, oh my gosh. Now another way to look at this too, that is in line with that, and basically another way to explain that is people go through life, they bucket things as good, bad, right, wrong. I want this, I don't want that. To change. They're like, wow, I'm done. I'm fed up. I'm never going to, how did I let myself get here? I'm never going to do this again. I'm going to change. I'm ready to change. And they go from motivation and believe that if they change their actions, they're going to get a different result. But how they showed up and flowed through that action and how they're continuing to show up through that action by saying, I'm fed up, is just the changing in action. When realizing that your actions are completely dictated by your thoughts are dictated by your feelings, and your feelings are dictated by your beliefs, and your beliefs dictate your feelings, your thoughts, and your actions. And that's how you've been showing up through life, that filled up that motivation is what we've learned. We learn it all the time, where you take an idea and you carry that through to completion. Motivation is finite. It runs out of energy. It's destructive. Just motivation that I'm talking about here, where you think you can change something, but you're not changing the belief, you'll end up destroying relationships. You'll end up destroying your health because you're going to hustle for just a little bit longer, right? Then I'll take care of my health. Oh, my relationship is on. The difference is understanding from that inner space, which is where our beliefs are, which we need to change, right? Which is the being. Remember, we said be, have, do, rather than do, have, be. So the being is where our beliefs are, understanding where our beliefs are, reframing those beliefs, changing those beliefs. So we feel different about it, because the beliefs that feel like I'm never going to make it, I'm not going to have enough, I can't make enough money, I can't, I'm not good enough, whatever it is, dictate the thoughts of I have to do this better. Then, and people would say that's positive thought. Yeah, you want to do better, great. But they don't realize that the energy that they're showing up and flowing through is never going to get them there. So ultimately, we have to get to a place of being where inspiration is. And then inspiration, as I said, motivation is where we take an idea and we carry it through to completion, and it's finite. Inspiration is infinite. It's when something grabs a hold of us and carries us through the completion. And it keeps pulling us and keeps pushing us and drawing us. And, or we could say but I like to say and, we come across everything that has kept us from getting to where we want to be, all the identities that need to crash and need to shatter and need to break, and all the false belief systems that served us for a while and deserve nothing but gratitude, but it's time to grow through them and to the other side of them, right?
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing. One, people are showing up and flowing through life basically the wrong direction. They believe that they have to do something to have something to be something, when actually you have to understand your being, that you have everything, and take action and do from there. They also believe that their actions are the key to different results, but that's not true. Your beliefs dictate your feelings, dictate your thoughts, dictate your actions. So you have to walk back and become aware of those beliefs that are causing that subconscious pattern and program to run, and then reprogram it. And then all of a sudden, watch out. Everything you wanted is already there.
Yeah. And it's simply in the blind spot.
Yeah.
You can't see it. And when you can see it, and you have good people in your life that, are able to see those things and say, hey, what do you think's happening here? You're able to move those subconscious behaviors, belief systems, identities, and you can give one person one set of tools and another the same set of tools. and one person takes off and is super successful, the other person might struggle. Why is that? It's because of exactly what you're talking about. So I love
Mhm.
that. So let's talk a little bit about the legacy, right? The legacy you're working on and the path that's gotten you here, the thing that's all these challenges and struggles you've been through, and even most recently, and the things that we're actually working on getting
Mhm.
off the ground and moving into the world to support people that are going through challenges.
Yeah. So I would say honestly, I talked about the lawsuit, or I didn't say there's a lawsuit. There's a big lawsuit against my business manager for sexual harassment, assault, and embezzlement, and everything, like 8 different things, right? That actually seemingly was a very difficult time, but the last year and a half of my life, or at least the few handful of months of the last year and a half of my life, was even more difficult for many many reasons. And basically, to give a little bit of a runway of that story, in 2013, I signed my fourth record deal. And 2 months, 3 months later, I met the mother of my children. And over the next 11 years from there, I literally gave up and sacrificed and lost everything of who I was. I was literally physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually thriving. And then within a year, I was falling apart with her. And I won't go into detail on how I had to learn that lesson a few times because I did leave her, we did get divorced, and then we got back together. But in November 2023, I was literally dying. Literally, I had a heart attack, kidney failure. My blood pressure was in hypertension stage 3 constantly, never coming down. And I realized I had to get out of that relationship or I was going to die, literally going to die. And it was extremely abusive. I learned all the facets of domestic abuse in the first few months after I went to domestic abuse therapy, and learned all the things that she had been doing. Or vindictiveness towards her. I truly want her to heal and grow if it's possible. I want her to be the best mother she can be for her children. I'm just not going to be by her side doing it any longer, at least not physically, right? And so I left, and that turned into thinking I was no longer going to be abused. Yes, the physical abuse stopped because I wasn't in the vicinity anymore. I wasn't there. But the legal administrative abuse with the court system, the psychological abuse, the technological abuse with literally defaming me and slandering imagined that would happen, which led to almost 30 false allegations with Department of Children and Families, which is the Florida version of Child Protective Services. All of them fully investigated, all of them unsubstantiated, every case closed. Okay. There was never a time I wasn't allowed to see my children, although she told everybody that I wasn't allowed to see my children. She tried to file 3 domestic violence injunctions against me that were denied at the outset. She filed a 4th one that was given a calendar hearing, but not a temporary restraining order, and of course was dismissed at that hearing. So there was more things that went on with that. Obviously, I was accused of sexually assaulting my daughter, all these things, and I got death threats. I couldn't even go back into the town I lived in because I was verbally assaulted every time I went into town by people I didn't even know. I was the chairman of the local chamber. I had to step down from that because I couldn't go to town anymore. So it was absolutely horrific. Talk about feeling alone and isolated and confused. It was beyond what I went through back in 2006, 7, 8, right? It was so much deeper than that. And I also, not being able to see my children, hear about them, anything. I attempted to go over there with a sheriff to do a standby assurance of peace multiple times. So I never tried to go on my own. I always took a sheriff there, and she refused to let me see the kids. And that's when I started to learn about how problematic our family law system is. And long story short, I was suicidal. I didn't know what to do. I put on 60 pounds. I didn't see my children, hear about them, get any updates for 404 days. And me, I was a full-time stay at home, work from home, homeschool my children, make them breakfast, lunch, dinner dad, right? I was a 24-hour a day dad from the time they were born. I wasn't and I'm not faulting men who go to work and stuff, but I chose to craft my life around my children and work from home. And so I could be with them and which a whole nother topic one day, John. People thought it was so great that I was with my kids all the time. Yes, you get to teach them more, but guess what? You also have the opportunity to do let them down even more because you're around them all the time. So anyway, we're on the other side of that to a degree. You know, you've been probably one of the closest friends that I've had that came out of this. Um, I don't trust a lot of people, but I trust you. So that's another thing I still work through, right? But through that, we just we started the Empower Men movement, and it's about really empowering everybody, men, women, children, grandparents, parents, everybody that gets affected by what I went through, whether it's the domestic violence or called intimate partner violence when it's partners where there's physical abuse. Yes. But guys, the psychological is often way more worse than the physical, the financial abuse I went through, everything I went through, as well as those who have a narcissistic partner potentially, which I do, or former partner, and who are dealing with custody issues in the court system and stuff. So the objective is to help other men. And of course, it helps women and children. We're going to help everybody along the way. But I believe in making a mess or a message out of my mess. And I am a man who went through this. And as I started to really look into this and meet other men, finding out things like 97.2% of men that are victims of domestic violence never report it, almost 100%. And those that do report it, only 20% seek help. And out of the 2,000, I think, little over 2,000 shelters in the US, there's only 2 for men. That made me say, wait a minute, something's got to change. And so, me, I've been very open and vulnerable and tough. And there's another facet of that I want to share that has to do with what we're talking about, but I'll pause there to see if you have any questions and stuff, because there's another piece of that was really, really difficult, that was more recent.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm thinking about the courage it takes to step forward and even, go out publicly and talk about, these things. Because as men, we're supposed to have everything together and, push down those feelings and things like that. So, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there going through similar circumstances that might feel alone and isolated in the process.
Yeah.
So, just know that there's solutions, people out there ready to help, looking at people that are, at that point where they're feeling maybe suicidal or, wanting to end their life or go into a depression, that's horrible. And we've had some conversations with some people that have gone through horrible situations in that, mind-blowingly, and they were able to come through it and turn it into a positive situation for others and themselves, which is very inspiring.
Yeah. I think I was part of a men's group last weekend, and I shared part of my story with that men's group. And somebody asked me what was the hardest part. And it just arose in me and kind of dawned on me then. What I want to share here is that I, for 10 or 11 years, hid this from people. I was actually she hit me the first time within the first couple of months of our relationship, and it was witnessed by one of my dearest friends. So it started in the beginning, and I hid it from everybody. And when I started to speak about it, I had the ego in me had the fear of, oh my God, what's going to happen? Now, of course, I had the typical feelings like other men do, like nobody's going to believe me. I'm 250, she's 5 foot, 100 pounds. Like nobody's going to believe that somebody like me could get abused and stuff like that. But what was really difficult was the fact that I hid it from people. And I'm a very, very transparent, honest person. And I value honesty, but I lied for 11 years to people. And I started to think about what are people going to think when I've shared the stage with Wayne Dyer and Eckhart Tolle and Louise Hay and Ram Dass when he was alive. Like I spoke at that level of spirituality and mindfulness for 20 years, all the while I was dying in my personal relationships. So that was a really tough identity to break through, to realize that. And the funny thing is nobody felt that way when I started talking about it. Nobody felt the way I feared they would. Some people who knew me said we knew something was wrong. You even saw one of my dearest friends, the one who did witness me get hit and witness abuse towards the kids from her as well. You saw her break down and how she felt when we interviewed her on, just how she didn't know how to help me. And she felt guilty for not helping me, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that identity aspect was my version of my masculinity or my idea of what a man should be being completely shattered. right? My authenticity and my you know my honesty with people.
Yeah.
Because everybody's
Yeah.
like, oh, you have so much peace and ease and freedom in your life, and you're so honest. I'm like, yeah. And I believed I was until this past year when I realized, well, crap, I've been hiding this from everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it always comes out, you know,
Yeah.
things will always come to the surface, and it's amazing that you've been able to move through it. And I've seen you move through it. And I think I said something to you, and I really appreciate you, you know, sharing how much our friendship has meant, and that trust, because I think life is all about surrounding yourself with people that have your back, you know, and are supportive and loving, caring, compassionate through it all. And you know, you're operating at, you know, 25% is most people's 100%. So, you know, what we're going out and sharing is very powerful. So that's something exciting to see you step into, you know, this year, and really come out of that I wouldn't say slumber, but like a reset, you
Yeah.
know, coming out and starting to move this mission forward. And you know, we're all about impact driven individuals, entrepreneurs, leaders, and you're leading the charge in this fight against uh, isolation and abuse, which
Yeah.
is out there and oftentimes not talked about.
More, yeah, more often than not talked about. I mean, I even found some of the statistics I'm gonna be putting out there are pretty mind blowing.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there's a lot more people doing all around the world. Like there's multiple country studies on this now,
Yeah.
ramping up where people are seeing
I'm
it.
excited to look, you know, maybe a year down the line to see how things evolve and what type of people show up in these conversations that we're starting, and bringing people together, and what kind of lives are going to be impacted, and what kind of lives are going to be saved as a
Yep.
result of that courage to step out and speak your truth, and be non-apologetic about it, and know that what's right is right. And just like when you're a kid, you know, you know what's right and you're standing up for it, which is awesome.
Myself again.
Yep.
But what keeps me going is realizing that I don't want anybody else to go through what I've gone through.
Hmm.
And when we, and it's kind of an ebb and flow. When we interviewed some of the other fathers and heard their stories and how drastic they were and how horrific some of the things they went through was, that somewhat I had to go through the ebb and flow of like, I don't want to do this anymore. Right. I don't want to know that this is the reality out there, but I had to come back to, I have to, I have to do it. But that's the difference, the motivation and the inspiration feel. That inspiration continues to push me.
Right.
So
Yeah. So if you're out there and you're going through a similar situation, you know, feel free to reach out and let us know. There's resources out there to support, and you know, we got your back. So, Aaron, I really appreciate you jumping on today and for the Underground Warriors podcast. And it is all about bringing impact-driven individuals, leaders, and entrepreneurs together that are making a positive impact in the world. And you are definitely one of them. And I appreciate your friendship, and the impact that we're working towards in the world. So appreciate you.
yeah.
Okay.